A single dad janitor, reborn Cole, walked into a boardroom to mop the floor, but within seconds he stopped a $20 billion merger with just one shocking sentence. The entire boardroom laughed at him until the truth came crashing down, leaving even the ruthless CEO speechless. What happened next not only saved the company, but changed his and his daughter Irina's life forever. Stay with me, because this story will leave you stunned till the very end. Reborn. Cole moved silently across the gleaming marble of Langdon Enterprises, the mop in his hands sweeping methodically as if it had memorized every corner of the towering building. The skyscraper stood like a beacon of wealth and ambition, yet for Reborn, it was only a workplace, a place where he blended into the shadows after hours. Every evening, when the executives vanished into their luxury cars, he arrived to clean up their world, his reflection faintly staring back at him from the polished glass walls. The janitor's overalls were faded and worn, carrying the unmistakable scent of disinfectant, a reminder of how far life had taken him from the dreams of his youth. But beneath that uniform was a man weighed down not by dirt, but by memories, memories of his late wife, whose laughter once filled the very silence he now worked in. Irina, his 8-year-old daughter, was the heartbeat that kept him moving, the reason he endured long nights and aching muscles. Each stroke of the mop was more than a chore. It was a promise to his daughter that he would never let her grow up believing her father was a failure. He thought often about how Irina's eyes lit up when she asked questions about the world, questions he sometimes struggled to answer but never ignored. The building itself seemed to whisper secrets as he cleaned, every hallway echoing with the fading voices of million-dollar conversations. Reborn had grown used to Ovi, rearing fragments of business talk, words like acquisitions, shares, and profits floating past his ears as though they belonged to another language. Most nights, he let the chatter drift away, focusing instead on finishing his shift so he could return home to tuck Irina into bed. But this particular Monday evening carried a strange electricity in the air, a hum of anticipation that made him pause. He had been assigned to clean the executive boardroom, a space that usually felt like a forbidden temple he was unworthy to enter. The vast mahogany table stretched across the room like a battlefield waiting for its generals, its surface already stacked with documents and untouched glasses of wine. The walls were lined with paintings of past leaders, stern faces staring down at him as if to remind him that he did not belong. Yet tonight, he couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to unfold, and that he, of all people, would be a part of it. His mop slid across the marble with a soft swish, but his ears stayed sharp, tuned to the muffled voices outside the room. The executives were gathering, their expensive shoes clicking against the floor, their laughter tinged with the arrogance of people who believed they owned the future. Reborn's heart beat faster as he realized he might not be alone in the boardroom for long, though his shift wasn't supposed to overlap with theirs. He glanced at the documents scattered across the table, pages filled with numbers and projections he couldn't fully understand, yet they pulled at his attention. His late wife, a brilliant engineer, had once tried to teach him how to see beyond numbers, how every figure told a story if you listened closely. That memory tugged at him now, as if she were whispering from beyond, urging him to pay attention. The chandelier above cast its golden glow across the room, making every glass of wine sparkle like temptation, like secrets waiting to be spilled. Reborn's hand tightened on the mop handle, torn between leaving quickly and lingering just long enough to glimpse what the executives were planning. He thought of Irina at home, sketching stars in her notebook, asking him when their life would change for the better. Her innocent hope pressed against his chest, making him wonder if this room, this night, held an answer he wasn't supposed to find. The double doors creaked open and laughter spilled inside, filling the air with confidence and champagne. Reborn froze, caught between duty and danger, standing in the middle of a world that had never once noticed his existence. Cassandra Langdon, the CEO herself, stepped in first, her presence commanding silence even before she spoke. She moved with a grace that spoke of power, her tailored suit and sharp heels announcing that this was her kingdom, and no one dared challenge her. The board members followed, their suits crisp, their voices loud, carrying the energy of men and women on the brink of history. Reborn tried to retreat quietly to the corner, pretending to be invisible, just another piece of furniture that didn't matter. But something in the way Cassandra's eyes scanned the room made him feel exposed, as though she could see past his mop and uniform. He bent lower, focusing on the marble floor, yet his ears caught the words that would change everything. Tonight, Cassandra declared, raising her glass. "We announce the merger that will redefine this company forever. $20 billion of power secured." Reborn's breath caught in his throat. $20 billion. The number echoed like thunder inside his mind, almost surreal in its weight. The board members cheered, clinking glasses, while he stood with water dripping from his mop, feeling suddenly out of place in a way he never had before. He tried to steady his breathing, reminding himself that this was none of his business, that he was only here to clean. Yet his eyes darted again to the documents, spread wide open on the tab, like a stage whisper daring him to look. One page fluttered slightly under the vent's cool breeze, catching his attention, revealing lines of data that sparked a strange familiarity. His pulse quickened as he remembered Irina's mother, bent over her work, explaining how fragile some of the company's projects really were. The laughter in the room grew louder, but Reborn's thoughts drowned it out, tangled in fragments of the past that suddenly felt urgent. He gripped the mop tighter, torn between pretending he had seen nothing and daring to trust the instincts that told him he had stumbled into something dangerous. The executives toasted again, but Cassandra's gaze flicked briefly toward him, as if sensing the storm of hesitation brewing behind his tired eyes. Reborn swallowed hard, his throat dry, the decision gnawing at him. Walk away as the invisible man, or stay just long enough to uncover the truth. His wife's voice seemed to echo in his mind. Sometimes the right moment chooses you, even when you're not ready. The chandelier light seemed brighter now, almost too bright, as if exposing him in the middle of a stage where he never asked to stand. Every instinct told him to leave, to finish mopping the floor and vanish before anyone noticed. But his feet remained rooted. Somewhere deep down, he knew fate had brought him here, to this boardroom, on this night, for a reason he couldn't yet name. The weight of the mop in his hand suddenly felt less like a tool and more like a shield, as if he might need to defend himself from something unseen. The executives began passing folders down the line, pages brimming with numbers, promises, and projections, each one a piece of a puzzle too big for him to ignore. Reborn leaned closer, eyes narrowing, catching a glimpse that sent a cold shiver down his spine, though he couldn't fully grasp why. It was there, in that half-glimpse of data, and in the echo of his late wife's warnings, that the first seed of suspicion took root inside him. The janitor of Langdon Enterprises, invisible to everyone else, was standing at the threshold of a secret that could shatter everything. And though he didn't know it yet, the decision he made in the next few breaths would decide not just his future, but the fate of the entire company. The hum of voices and the clinking of glasses filled the boardroom, but Reborn barely heard any of it, his eyes locked on the documents that now seemed to scream at him from the table. His heart pounded so violently he thought the entire room might hear it, and for a fleeting second he considered slipping out the door before anyone noticed the storm raging inside him. But the words, the numbers, the projections dancing across the papers refused to let him leave, tugging at every memory of his late wife's warnings about the company's fragile foundations. Cassandra Langdon's voice rang out again, commanding attention as she lifted her glass high, her tone laced with the triumph of someone about to carve her name into history. "Tonight, we seal a future of strength, innovation, and security," she declared, her words echoing beneath the chandelier like a coronation speech. Reborn's hands trembled on the mop handle, the weight of choice pressing down heavier than any bucket he had ever carried. His late wife's voice seemed to whisper from the back of his mind, sharp and urgent, urging him not to stay silent. He opened his mouth, then shut it, fear gripping his throat. What was he thinking, daring to interrupt this world of power where janitors had no voices? But then his eyes caught again on a single figure in the report. A production rate tied to a plant he knew better than anyone in that room. That plant wasn't running at full capacity. In fact, it was shutting down, its machines silenced forever, something he had seen with his own eyes on one of his cleaning shifts. The executives laughed, raising their glasses higher, drunk on the illusion of victory, while Reborn stood as Shinashi at the edge of the battlefield, his truth clawing at his chest. His breathing quickened, his knuckles white against the mop's wooden handle, until finally, before he could stop himself, the words burst out. "That merger will bankrupt you in 5 years. Your data model is wrong." The sentence hung in the air like a blade suspended mid-fall, slicing through the laughter and cheer, freezing the room into stunned silence. The mop dripped water onto the floor, each droplet echoing louder than the clinks of the champagne glasses that now remained untouched. A janitor, a nobody, had just dared to speak in the middle of a $20 billion deal, and the weight of his audacity pressed against every pair of eyes in the room. Some executives blinked in disbelief, as if unsure they had heard correctly, while others broke into mocking chuckles, shaking their heads at the absurdity. "Did the janitor just give us financial advice?" One whispered loudly enough for the room to hear, drawing smirks from others. Another scoffed, "Next thing you know, he'll be telling us how to run international markets." The room filled with condescending laughter, each note digging at Reborn's already trembling resolve. But Cassandra didn't laugh. Her sharp gaze cut through the noise like a blade, pinning him in place, studying him not as a janitor, but as a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. Her glass lowered slowly, her fingers tapping the stem as if calculating whether his words carried courage or lunacy. Reborn's throat tightened, but he refused to back down, clinging to the only weapon he had, his truth. His grip on the mop tightened, his knuckles aching, as he forced himself to stand straighter, to speak louder despite the storm of ridicule surrounding him. "The projected savings you're celebrating," he said, his voice steadier now. "They depend on production from the Ashford plant." The room went silent again, though the silence was heavy with disbelief rather than respect. "I know that plant," Reborn continued, each word fueled by memory, "because my late wife was the lead engineer there, and I've seen the truth with my own eyes." Gasps rippled faintly among the board members, though some rolled their eyes, convinced this was nothing more than a janitor clinging to scraps of personal grief. But Reborn pressed on, unwilling to let the mocking smirk steal his voice now that it had finally been found. "That plant is shutting down. Its machines are silent. Its people are gone. Your model assumes production that doesn't exist, and in 5 years you'll collapse under your own projections." The words cut sharper than any blade, echoing into the vaulted silence that followed, pressing against the air until no one dared sip their champagne. Cassandra leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing, as if testing the weight of each word he had just spoken. The board members exchanged incredulous glances, some muttering under their breath, others frowning as though his knowledge unsettled them more than they wished to admit. Reborn felt sweat trickle down the back of his neck, his heart pounding, but he didn't retreat, not when every fibre of his being told him his wife's voice was guiding him. The silence stretched, suffocating and tense, until one executive finally sneered, "A janitor with insider knowledge? What's next? You'll tell us you're an economist too?" Laughter followed again, hollow and uneasy this time, as if their confidence was beginning to fracture under the weight of possibility. Reborn swallowed hard, his gaze flicking to Cassandra, who remained unreadable, her eyes dark pools of calculation and curiosity. For a moment, he wondered if he had just destroyed his livelihood, if by speaking he had doomed himself to unemployment and ridicule. But then he remembered Irina's smile, her belief in him, and he knew he could not regret telling the truth. The mop in his hands, once just a tool for cleaning, now felt like a staff of defiance, a symbol of a man, refusing to stay silent when silence meant ruin. The air seemed to thicken with every second of Cassandra's silence, her sharp gaze never leaving his trembling figure. Then, slowly, she placed her glass down on the table, the sound of crystal against wood ringing like a signal for something to begin. Her voice, low and cutting, sliced through the room. "Explain." The laughter died instantly, every mocking smirk erased as all eyes turned back to the janitor who had dared to interrupt. Reborn inhaled deeply, his chest heavy but his resolve solidifying, and he stepped forward, gripping the mop like a shield as he prepared to tell them what no one else had the courage to say. The air in the boardroom shifted, anticipation buzzing like a live wire, as the invisible janitor prepared to expose the flaw that could unravel billions. And though the executives still doubted him, something in Cassandra's piercing stare suggested that, for the first time, she didn't. The crystal glass Cassandra had set down still vibrated faintly on the polished mahogany table, the soft hum ringing in the silence that had swallowed the boardroom whole. Reborn's chest rose and fell with measured breaths, every inhale a battle against the fear pressing down on him, every exhale a vow to stand his ground. The executives shifted in their seats, their designer suits rustling like the wings of restless birds, irritation sparking in their eyes. One man finally broke the tension with a sharp laugh, the kind meant to wound. "A janitor teaching us finance?" he scoffed, shaking his head as though the absurdity alone should erase Reborn's words. Another joined in, his voice dripping with disdain. "Perhaps we should have the cleaning staff audit our accounts next. Imagine the savings." The board erupted in chuckles, the polished chamber filled with the noise of arrogance masquerading as authority. Yet in the Storm of ridicule, Cassandra did not laugh. Her eyes remained locked on Reborn, the weight of her stare heavy, cold and calculating. With a single lift of her hand, the room fell quiet. The mocking swallowed, as though even seasoned executives feared disobeying her silent command. Her lips curved into something unreadable, neither smile nor scowl, but her voice was sharp and unwavering. "Check the numbers!" The room froze. A ripple of unease passed across the faces of the board members, as if the command itself betrayed cracks in their certainty. One executive leaned forward, his voice tight with disbelief. "Cassandra, you can't possibly mean to waste our time." She cut him off without turning her gaze from Reborn. "I said, check the numbers." The authority in her tone brooked no argument. Slowly, hesitantly, a younger analyst fumbled with the documents, flipping through sheets, eyes scanning rapidly over the projections as beads of sweat formed at his temple. Reborn remained still, though inside his stomach twisted into knots, his body torn between triumph and terror. What if he was wrong? What if grief had clouded his judgment? But then he remembered the silence of that plant, the locked gates, the dust settling on machines that once hummed with life, and certainty steeled his nerves again. The analyst's face paled as his finger traced a line of numbers, his lips pressing together in an effort to mask his discovery. The murmurs began, low at first, then rising, as other executives leaned over the papers, their confident facades fracturing with every calculation that confirmed Reborn's words. Cassandra leaned forward now, her elbows on the table, her eyes narrowing in silent observation as the empire she had built wavered under the weight of a janitor's truth. "Explain how you know this," she demanded softly, the kind of softness that carried more threat than a scream. Reborn swallowed, his throat dry, but he refused to shrink back. "My wife," he began, his voice steadying with every word, "was the lead engineer at Ashford. She kept journals, notes about the plan, its decline. I saw the warnings. I saw the layoffs. And I've spent years cleaning your halls, listening to your people boast, whisper, and complain. I've pieced together what your algorithms overlook." The room stirred again, executives exchanging sharp glances, some with suspicion, others with reluctant awe. "So you're saying," one board member challenged, "that a janitor has insights our billion-dollar systems missed?" Reborn met his gaze, his voice firm. "I'm saying no system can see what a human heart refuses to ignore." A hush swept through the room, heavier than before, as though the walls themselves absorbed his words. Cassandra's eyes lingered on him, not with the disdain she had first shown, but with a flicker of something else. Conflict, perhaps respect, or perhaps fury at being cornered by truth in front of her kingdom. The clash between arrogance and reality thickened the air, a tension so sharp it seemed to vibrate through the marble floors. An older board member slammed his hand on the table, breaking the silence. "This is outrageous. We cannot let a janitor dictate billion-dollar decisions." His voice shook with more fear than anger, though he masked it poorly. Cassandra's gaze cut to him with lethal precision, silencing him instantly before returning to Reborn. "If what you claim is true," she said slowly, deliberately, "then you may have just saved this company." Her words hung in the air like a gavel striking down judgment, splitting the atmosphere in two. The executives bristled, their pride wounded, yet none dared speak against her. Reborn felt his breath hitch, a dizzying mix of relief and disbelief washing over him. But then Cassandra's tone shifted, colder now, her eyes narrowing further. "Or," she added, "you've humiliated me in front of my board with lies and half-truths. If that's the case, janitor, you'll regret ever opening your mouth." That room stirred again, murmurs rising, the balance tilting dangerously between salvation and ruin. Reborn stood rooted, his knuckles white against the mop handle, every nerve screaming at him to run, yet his heart anchoring him to the truth he carried. The clash of worlds, the invisible janitor and the untouchable CEO, now burned in the silence, and no one in the room could predict which would triumph. The silence that followed was suffocating, so heavy that even the soft hum of the chandelier above seemed too loud. Executives leaned back in their leather chairs, their faces pale as the finance team shuffled nervously with laptops and thick binders. Cassandra's order had been absolute: verify the janitor's claim, and now the room awaited judgment. Reborn stood motionless, his mop still in hand, his breathing steady, though inside his chest a storm of uncertainty raged. Every second stretched unbearably, the shuffle of paper and the rapid clicking of calculator keys marking the rhythm of suspense. A young financial analyst looked up briefly, eyes wide, before quickly lowering them again, as if afraid to meet Cassandra's gaze. Another whispered frantically to his colleague, their hushed tones carrying more fear than confidence. Slowly, page by page, number by number, the facade began to crack. What Reborn had claimed, what had been dismissed as the ramblings of a janitor, was taking shape in hard, undeniable figures. The Ashford plant, once hailed as a cornerstone of the merger's projections, was nothing but a ghost in the financial statements. Its absence ripped a hole straight through the foundation of the deal. Beads of sweat formed on the brows of seasoned executives who had bet their reputations on this move, men and women unaccustomed to being wrong. Finally, the head of finance cleared his throat, his voice trembling despite years of boardroom authority. The numbers confirm it, he admitted, each word striking the air like a hammer against glass. The merger will not yield the projected returns. In fact, it would bleed the company dry within 5 years. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by a silence so absolute it seemed the walls themselves held their breath. Glasses of champagne, once raised in triumph, now stood untouched, their bubbles dying unnoticed. All eyes turned slowly, inexorably, toward Cassandra Langdon. She remained seated at first, her face unreadable, her sharp features carved in steel. Cassandra Langdon was not a woman accustomed to public defeat. Pride had built her empire, pride had silenced rivals, and pride had made her word law within these walls. Now, for the first time, that pride stood on trial. Her board waited, unsure if she would crush the janitor for daring to embarrass her or bow to the truth he had revealed. Reborn's heart thudded painfully, each beat echoing in his ears like a drum of fate. Arena's face flashed in his mind, her innocent trust, her hope, and he prayed silently that he hadn't just signed away their fragile stability. Cassandra's chair scraped softly against the marble as she rose to her feet, the sound sharp and deliberate in the stillness. Her heels clicked as she walked slowly around the table, every step measured, every eye following her with nervous anticipation. She stopped directly across from Reborn, her gaze locking onto his with an intensity that felt like it could burn through him. Seconds stretched. No one dared breathe. Then her lips parted, and her voice, low and commanding, sliced through the silence. "This man just saved us $20 billion. Gasps exploded across the room, disbelief crashing against the walls as if the board itself couldn't comprehend what they had heard. Executives shifted uncomfortably, some muttering, others frozen in stunned silence. Cassandra wasn't finished. She turned, sweeping her gaze across the room, her tone sharp and unyielding. "From this moment forward, Reborn Coal is no longer our janitor." Her words fell, like thunder, echoing in the cavernous boardroom, breaking the last remnants of arrogance clinging to the air. The executives exchanged glances, their expressions torn between outrage and reluctant admiration. Cassandra's final declaration cut through the tension like a blade. "He is our consultant." The room erupted, not in cheers, but in shock. Some leaned forward, their mouths opening to protest, while others stared at Reborn as though seeing him for the first time. Reborn himself felt the world tilt beneath his feet, his grip on the mop handle tightening as the weight of her words crashed down upon him. Consultant. The word didn't feel real, not yet. Not in a room where he still wore bleach-stained overalls and shoes worn thin by years of labor. Yet Cassandra's eyes did not waver, her conviction sealing his place before anyone dared to object. For a moment, the clash of disbelief and authority filled the room like a storm barely contained. And though Reborn stood trembling inside, outwardly he remained still, his mop at his side, the symbol of the invisible man who had just been pulled into the light. The boardroom, once deafening with laughter and arrogance, now sat in stunned silence, awaiting what would come next. The boardroom still buzzed with the shock of Cassandra's declaration when Reborn stepped out that night, mop in hand, his heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. The cold air outside felt different somehow, sharper, cleaner, as though the world itself had shifted beneath his feet. For years he had walked out of that building as nothing more than a shadow. Tonight he left as something entirely new. The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind of change. Reborn no longer pushed the mop through silent hallways at night. Instead, he walked through the same marble corridors in daylight, seated in meetings with people who once mocked his presence. The whispers began immediately, executives calling him the janitor who stopped the merger, employees staring as he passed, unsure whether to respect or ridicule him. Through it all, Cassandra Langdon never wavered. She stood by her decision, introducing him not as a man from maintenance, but as a consultant whose insights had saved the company from ruin. She mentored him personally, not because she pitied him, but because she was fascinated by the mind that hid beneath calloused hands and weary eyes. Reborn absorbed everything, not with arrogance, but with the quiet diligence that had carried him through years of unseen labor. He studied reports late into the night, just as he once scrubbed floors. He asked questions others were too proud to voice, and slowly even the skeptics began to see him not as an intruder, but as a man whose perspective carried weight. Irina noticed the change first. When she visited the office, no longer did she hang her head in embarrassment at the sight of her father in overalls. Instead, her small hand clutched his proudly as employees whispered his name. Her eyes shone with pride when she saw him seated at a polished table, his opinion requested, his presence respected. But Reborn never forgot where he came from. On more than one occasion, he carried his mop back to the maintenance floor, greeting the old staff with the same humility as before. "This is where I started," he told them simply, his voice warm but firm. "And I'll never forget it." Those moments earned him more respect than any title ever could. The corporate halls hummed with new energy, the story of the janitor who saved a company spreading beyond the walls of Langdon Enterprises. Investors, employees, even rival firms spoke his name with equal parts awe and disbelief. Yet Reborn remained grounded, holding on to the memory of his late wife, whose wisdom had planted the seed of truth that saved everything. Cassandra, once known for her pride and unyielding arrogance, found herself changed as well. She no longer saw Reborn as an interruption, but as a mirror reflecting the blind spots she had ignored. Late evenings in her office, she would sit with him, poring over figures and strategies, but their conversations often drifted into life, loss, and resilience. One afternoon, as they walked side by side into the same boardroom where it had all begun, Cassandra slowed her steps. The air between them carried no tension now, only quiet respect. She turned slightly, her sharp demeanor softened, and her voice carried words that would linger forever. "Sometimes," she whispered, her eyes meeting his with a rare vulnerability, "it takes the simplest man to reveal the greatest truth." Reborn's chest tightened, not with pride, but with gratitude, a sense that he had not just changed his fate, but fulfilled the promise he had made to his wife and to his daughter. Irina's laughter echoed in his memory, blending with Cassandra's words, a reminder that every mop stroke, every sacrifice, every lonely night had been worth it. The boardroom doors opened before them, the same doors that had once symbolized a world closed off to him. Now they welcomed him inside. Not as a janitor, not as an outsider, but as a man who had earned his place. And as he stepped through, the past and future converged in a single moment of quiet triumph. Reborn Cole, the invisible man who once cleaned the marble floors, had become the voice that saved an empire, and the father who proved to his daughter that no dream was too small and no man too invisible to change the world. And that's how a single dad janitor changed the fate of a $20 billion empire with just one sentence. What did you think of Reborn's story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with someone who needs inspiration today, and subscribe to Heartwoven Tales for more powerful and emotional stories every week. Your support means the world and keeps this channel alive. Until the next story, stay inspired.